Hi there, I'm the Myth Keeper. Welcome back to my channel. At the end of last week's video, I said that we'd be covering some evil gods this week. Well, in fact, that'll be next week. This week, I'm doing another region deep dive. And just like my first one of Varissia, this one's going to be super long. So you don't have to watch it all in one go. Use the chapter titles to help you find the content that's useful for you and your playgroup, of course. This week, since we're coming up to Halloween, I decided that what I'd like to do is to tell the history of Ustalav. That is Golarian's spookiest nation. It is a nation that was settled by Varissians, but it's got a really rich and storied history, and I think you'll enjoy this one.
Ustalav sits on the northern shore of Lake Carthan and has a rich and storied history. It has exchanged hands numerous times over the many centuries covered by the history of the Inner Sea, and today it is a fog-shrouded nation of countless horrors, including such inhabitants as vampires, werewolves, and even stranger alien terrors not easily described. Despite the grimness of their surroundings and the many horrors in their distant and recent history, there are many good people living in Ustalav, and they've made good homes for themselves in this region regardless, and they are willing to lay down their lives to protect it. If you haven't spent much time here in the game world, sit down and relax, because this should be a fun video for you. Ustalav is one of the coolest nations in the Inner Sea, and a great place to have rich and horror-filled adventures. The history of Ustalav. Unlike Varissia, Ustalav was relatively quiet during the Age of Serpents and the Age of Legend. It lay just outside the confines of ancient Thassalon, whose borders extended only as far as modern-day Belkzen, and the domain of the Serpent folk didn't spread this far to the north either. Instead, for many thousands of years, ancient Ustalav was the dwelling place of the central Avestinian Kelid people. In particular, various clans of the Sarkorian Kelids, who warred constantly with one another for kingship over this rugged but fertile land. One group that did make their way to Ustalav in this early period of the Inner Sea's history were the Elves, who built one of the Ayudara in the Ebonwall forest just south of the Hungry Mountains. However, just like they did everywhere else, the Ebonwall Elves fled the world before the Earthfall Cataclysm, and the Ustalavi settlements were left abandoned for thousands of years. The ancient empire of Thassalon that was destroyed during the Earthfall Cataclysm had one small encroachment into Ustalav in this time as well. Zutha, the rune lord of gluttony, master of the Thessalonian realm of Gastash, created the cenotaph, an ancient, monumentally large pillar of black rock that arose from a cliff on the southern tip of the Tusk Mountains. The cenotaph was constructed on this location and to its height specifically to allow access to a natural planar portal that was used by the rune lord in his necromantic endeavors, as he was a master necromancer. It would also later be used by the Whispering Tyrant for the same purpose. Perhaps all of Ustalav's many long troubles with the living dead could be dated back to the construction of this dreadful obelisk. Moving on to the Age of Darkness, the Orcs first emerged onto the surface world in this period, and they made their home in Belkzen. As a result, there would be many clashes between the Kelid people and the Orcs along the various border regions during this age. Shortly after the arrival of the Orcs, the Dwarves also emerged onto the surface, which was a great reprieve for the Kelids, as the Orcs and Dwarves were ancient enemies dating back millennia before either of them had ever reached the surface. In their hubris, the Dwarves established their largest settlement right in the center of the Orc emergence point, the Sky Citadel of Kuldukar. They did also establish the dwarf fortress of Gerdum in the Tusk Mountains as well, and laid claim to much of these rugged hills. During the Age of Anguish, the Orcs and the Dwarves continued to wage war upon each other for dominance of the region of Belkzen for hundreds of years. During this time period, along the far western coastlines of Avestan, there emerged nomadic people, for which that land would later be named. These were, of course, the Varissian people, who traveled the length and breadth of that land, never settling in one place for too long. They established a number of far-reaching caravan routes in their homeland, the most significant of which for our purpose today was the Sklakari Road, which branched from the easternmost reaches of the Yonda Bakari. This route continued across the Storval Plateau into lands to the east, avoiding the Orc and Dwarf conflict zones, eventually following the River Esk to a small settlement along the shores of Lake Carthan that would later become the city of Vigil. In -3708, the Orcs laid siege to and eventually overran Kuldukar in the Battle of Nine Stones. The Orcs renamed the city Urgir, meaning first home in their native tongue, and the victory over the Dwarves led to the Orcs' Great Golden Age. The Orc kingdom of Belkzen was secured. When it was obvious that the Sky Citadel of Kuldukar was going to fall, the last king of the citadel, Durlach II, entrusted the Oathkeepers, a priesthood dedicated to Torag's wisest son, Kols, with a sacred duty, protecting his daughter and the prophecy of ascendance. According to the prophecy, a descendant of King Targic would one day lead their nation into a new golden age. King Durlach's daughter was the last of Targic's bloodline. The priests of Kols accepted the duty and retreated to Gerdum, the surrounding hills were cleared of dwarven settlements, and when the fortress closed its doors, the only hints left of Gerdum's existence were its small front gates and a number of ventilation shafts cleverly disguised to look like natural rock. The descendants of the dwarves who moved to Gerdum still dwell in the fortress, guarding their secrets. They have maintained the most valuable treasures of dwarven kind for over 8 millennia. Meanwhile, for Versean nomads who made their way across the Sclacari road in the lands around Lake and Carthen, they were cut off from the rest of Varissia, and the Orc dominion in Belkzen had made the Sclacari unsafe to travel. The Varissians instead began to spread east into the lands now known as Ustalav, forming new caravan trails throughout these Kelid-ruled lands. Although there were some clashes between the two people, by and large, the settled Kelid tribes cared little about the nomadic people that had entered these lands, and largely kept on the move, sometimes even valuing them as neutral trading partners between the fractious Kelid clans. A few thousand years would pass, and though there would be periodic exchanges between the eastern and western Varissian nomads, for many, the lands north of Lake and Carthen started to feel like a new homeland. These Varissians continued to live largely peacefully with the Kelids. This area would be initially largely unaffected when, in the year 0, far to the south, the mortal man Ardeal ascended to godhood, and his new faith would begin to spread like wildfire through the southern lands. It was only 500 years later, however, that they would be, as the Taldan Empire, spurred on by their belief in the coming golden age of humanity, would expand northwards and around the Great Lake, pushing the native Kelids, who would not abide Taldan rule, northwards into Sarkoris, or southwest into the lands of modern-day Lastwall and Nermathis. Some of the Kelids remained, but were pushed up into the Hungry Mountains, where the Taldans didn't settle or begin to build cities. The less combative Varissians, however, who stuck to their nomadic lifestyle and slow-moving caravan trails, tended to remain in Taldan-occupied Ustalav, largely accepting the rule of the conquering Taldans. In 837, in the craggy cliffs of the Hungry Mountains, a Sarkorian Kelid child was born in the time of Taldan-occupied Ustalav. That child would be named Tar-Bafon, and not much is known about his early childhood. What is known is that by the age of 24, Tar-Bafon had become a self-taught wizard, and he embraced the magical school of necromancy, using armies of the living dead to make his first conquest Castrilian, the largest city on the Isle of Entepper. The city was occupied by Palakari Kelids that had migrated north from Druma, but Tar-Bafon did not consider them kinsmen, and slew them all without a thought. He renamed the city Zin-Grifar, following the conventions of the rune lords of old, and gave the island the name it still holds today, the Isle of Terror. As his ambition grew with his power, he sought the cenotaph, resting place of rune lord Zutha, and unlocked the necromantic power of the sleeping rune lord by 880. He used his newfound power to claim the whole of the Isle of Terror for himself, slaying the black dragon Karmaros that laid claim to much of that island in order to do so. Now bent on world conquest, he recruited orcs and undead to invade all of Avestan. With so many orcs bowing to his power, Belkzen was his first conquest, but western and southern Ustalav soon followed. This soon attracted the attention of the God King Ardeal himself, however. Tar-Bafon attempted to lure the God King into a trap at a place called the Well of Sorrows on the Isle of Terror. But he failed, and their conflict ended when Ardeal killed him in 896 and buried him there. His corpse, however, was retrieved by his followers and reburied in his birthplace of Ustalav. After Tar-Bafon's death, Taldan rule in the lands formerly occupied by Tar-Bafon and his legions of living dead never fully solidified. Instead, for almost 1,000 years, Ustalav remained a sort of no-man's land, containing numerous Taldan military outposts, the remnants of the tyrant's undead legions, orc invaders, as well as the diaspora of both Varissian and Kelid communities. It is in this messy context, in 2319, that a Varissian child would be born in the city of Ardis. His name was Soividia Ustav. Even as a young man, he recognized that for all the dark history of that land, Varissians had dwelt there now for several thousand years, and in the wake of all that terrible history, there was a real opportunity to create a homeland for themselves. He was a great speaker, and he traveled from town to town, using the old well-worn caravan roads, and he began to unite the Varissian people, both nomadic and settled. As a young man, he personally led the forces that drove the dreaded Death's Head tribe of orcs from the Hungry Mountains, forcing them to relocate to the hold of Belkzen to the west. His growing power in the region led him into conflict with the Sarkorian Kelids, who were quick to point out that they had lived in those lands long before the coming of the Varissians. No accord could be reached between the Varissians and the Kelids in that time, and war soon broke out between them. After defeating the Kelid shaman king Vokes, Ustav wrapped the Stormheart clan's menhir and dragged it from its holy place to Crusaders Square, the central square in Ustalav's new capital of Ardis. This final act broke the spirit of the Kelids and ended the war. The Varisians had claimed Ustalav for themselves, and Soividia Ustav was crowned king of the new kingdom of Ustalav in 2361. Although King Ustav had warred with the Orcs and Kelids to claim his crown, he did not have to contend with the Taldan conquerors from the south. He made peace with the Taldans, who were happy to have a buffer state between themselves and the Orc lands of Belkzen, and who were equally worried about having the responsibility of patrolling Ustalav to quell the constant threat of the living dead. They set a border between Ustalav and the furthest extent of the old Taldan Empire along the West Selen River. King Soividia Ustav's descendants ruled Ustalav for over 500 years, bringing about what many consider to be the nation's golden age. The majority of Ustalavi Varisians went from being a largely nomadic people to a sedentary people. They settled in some of the many towns the Taldans had established during their reign, and in some new towns and cities as well. Although it is true that in this time the line of Ustalavi kings were slowly purging the realm of the living dead, and not surprisingly worship of the goddess Pharasma grew considerably in this time, there were a few notable exceptions to this rule, particularly when it came to vampires. In many places, accords were struck with the aristocracy of the night, because unlike the mindless dead raised to feast on the living by Tar-Baphon, vampires could actually be reasoned with, and the humans in those times longed for peace and security. Sadly, the Taldans would end up being proved the wiser for having allowed King Ustav to establish himself in those lands, as in the year 3203 Tar-Baphon resurrected himself into a powerful lich, the Whispering Tyrant. In less than 3 years, the tyrant re-established his dominion over those lands, killing King Ardurus, the last king of Ustalav, at the Battle of Dawnmarsh. The fallen king, reanimated as the grim jester called the Shrieking Sovereign, preceded the tyrant's legions into Ardis and hung himself from the palace tower. Thus began nearly 6 centuries of nearly uncontested rule by the Whispering Tyrant. The rule was nearly uncontested, but not quite. The vampire aristocrats who had grown in power and influence during the period of the First Kingdom of Ustalav were not happy with the tyrant's return. The vampires put up a pretty significant resistance until in 3220 the Whispering Tyrant acquired the loyalty of the elder vampire Lord Malleus. In turn, Lord Malleus led a purge known as the Blood Drought, slaughtering or exiling all vampires within Ustalav who refused to pay allegiance to the Whispering Tyrant. Not all the vampires were defeated or cowed by Lord Malleus, but active opposition to the tyrant by the Ustalavi vampires was greatly reduced. Some continued to challenge his rule, however, chief among them being the elder vampire Luvik Sirvaj, who waged a guerrilla war against the tyrant wherever he could. In 3801, the Ardenite organization called the Shining Crusade secured a beachhead in Ustalav around the township of Vontil. In 3818, Arden's herald, the warrior goddess Erasni, was sent down from heaven to aid in the fight. Sadly, she was no match for the Lich, and Tar-Baphon humiliated and killed Erasni in 3823. Inspired by her bravery and sacrifice, a then mortal knight of Ozem named Diomede led the crusade in the final battle against the tyrant in 3827. In the battle, Tar-Baphon cast a terrible magic upon his enemies, but a mighty artifact known as the Shield of Arden absorbed the magic before shattering into a dozen pieces. One of those pieces embedded itself into the Lich's hand, and the Whispering Tyrant burned with holy fire. Incapacitated, the Lich's soul fled his body, returning to the phylactery beneath his fortress tower of Gallowspire. Unable to destroy the Lich, the Crusaders instead erected the Great Seal, locking him within Gallowspire, beneath which they hoped Tar-Baphon would be eternally entombed. In 3828, the nation of Lastwall was established by Iomade and the Knights of Ozem, to be a vigilant bastion against the possible return of the Whispering Tyrant. Meanwhile, in Ustalav, with the tyrant's defeat, the Ustalavi people entered into a period of rebuilding. A prominent figure to emerge in this time was a man named Ilmhost Weist. Ilmhost was a scholar and a civic leader of Ustalav, who gained great influence in the wake of the Shining Crusade. Among various other accomplishments, Ilmhost was responsible for commissioning the reflecting pools and accompanying columns in Caliphas' Restoration Park, depicting the Crusaders' victories against the Whispering Tyrant's armies. One of the things that Ilmhost believed in very fervently was that in order for Ustalav to rebuild itself, it needed some line of continuity to the old kingdom founded by the legendary King Ustav, someone who could serve as a unifying symbol for the Ustalavi people. Unfortunately, the royal line had died out during the country's long Dark Age, and the few surviving nobles only had tenuous ties to their former ruling family. Nevertheless, Ilmhost was undeterred, and he initiated a countrywide census to search for the surviving nobles and research their family trees so he could help the nation identify the true heir. He embarked on the census in 3832, and it took him 2 years to reveal his findings. In 3834, he declared the best claims to the throne were in the heirs of the Odranti and Caliphas lines. Androdos Odranti was selected from among those two as the first prince of the newly restored immortal Principality of Ustalav, while Sasagia Caliphas instead refounded the city of Caliphas and became the count of the greater county of Caliphas. The rest of the country then divided itself more or less into the modern county structure of today, comprising from top to bottom the counties of Vieland, Lozeri, Canterwall, Odranto, Sinaria, Barstoi, Ardeal, Virlych, Amaans, Ulcazar, Versex, Varno, and the aforementioned county of Greater Caliphas. The original country also comprised the counties of Genoit and Melkat in the area that is now modern-day Rezmiran, although they had already joined together to form the independent Archduchy of Melkat, member state of the River Kingdoms, by the time the nation of Ustalav was re-establishing itself. By 3859, the Orcs of Belkzen had also started to recover from their own suffering, and expansionist desires had led them to regularly raid western Ustalav. The county of Canterwall began the construction of the Bleak Wall, the insufficient defensive barricade between Ustalav and Belkzen. Also in this time, a Pharasman priestess named Mother Cavapesta began preaching upon the shores of Lake de Virmis, spreading a somber vision of Pharasma's worship known as the Pharasman penitence. The priestess Cavapesta died in 3879. Her followers founded the town of Cavapesta nearby and renamed Lake de Virmis as well. They also erected a great cathedral outside the town in her honor. In 3988, Aldus Alden Cantor, future Count of Vieland, returned from explorations in Osirian and Deep Garand. Upon returning home, he began lecturing on foreign philosophies and mystical paths to magical power. Within a year, Cantor and his followers founded the esoteric order of the Palatine Eye. Aldus Cantor was later removed as head of the esoteric order, allegedly due to ever-increasing erraticism and dementia. The esoteric order opened membership to any with the wealth to pay its yearly dues, attracting young nobles from across the country. Cantor himself vanished under mysterious circumstances in 4028, and it is not known what happened to him. In 4042, Count Andachi of Tamravenna, desperate in the face of mounting orc threats, put out a public call for aid, offering land and title to any who would answer. A charming but sinister mercenary named Kazavon arrived in response to this call, and he assembled a significant army of mercenaries, borrowing a good deal of money from Count Andachi to do so. Lord Kazavon successfully drove the orcs from western Ustalav. In the wake of this, he established the keep of Skarwall in Belkzen, and founded his own realm amid the conquered orc lands. Over the next 16 years, Kazavon revealed his true nature, not as a human at all, but as a mighty blue dragon committed to the Dark Lord Zon Kuthon. Kazavon's ambitions grew, and his domain expanded both westwards into the Storval Plateau, where the Shoanti people fell victim to his wrath, and eastwards into both Lastwall and eventually the county of Canterwall. Kazavon eventually killed Count Andachi, the very man who had called for him in the first place, at the Battle of the Screaming Tree. Here Andachi's forces were slaughtered, and Kazavon ordered Andachi and 50 of his officers to be impaled alive on a massive thorn tree. Kazavon then conquered large parts of western Ustalav, including Andachi's large castle along the Bleak Wall. In 4058, Kazavon was eventually defeated by a group of heroes and mercenaries from the esoteric order of the Palatine Eye, led by a knight of Lastwall named Mandravius. After Kazavon was killed, his body was dismembered to keep him from rising from the grave, and each of the pieces were hidden at secret sites around the Inner Sea in order to make sure that the evil dragon would never be able to reform again. In 4144, the Countess Robeskia of Ulcazar had the residents of the Monastery of the Vale quietly slaughtered in the name of Norgorber, then sequestered the library of ancient secrets held there. The new cult of the Reaper of Reputation established in the monastery dedicated itself to keeping and collecting varied secrets, forming the order of assassins known as the Agents of Anaphexia. In 4288, numerous blatant vampire attacks in Caliphas led to a widespread purge of the city's blood drinkers. Hundreds of vampires were killed. The vampires' leader, Luvik Sirvaj, the same one who had galvanized opposition to the Whispering Tyrant a millennia ago, ordered his followers to go into hiding and adopt subtler practices. In 4399, the home of Aldous Alton Cantor caught fire, just moments before the beginning of the new year. The fire revealed a stories-tall monument of black stone hidden within, its purpose unknown. In 4422, brothers Lyron and Cadamentreus investigated and destroyed the mound structure known as Calyx Court in Vieland. They founded the world-renowned University of Lepidstadt to house their findings and pass on their research. In 4536, Count Ristomir Tyriak of the county of Varno became afflicted with vampirism, becoming the first major Count of Ustalav whom is broadly known to be a vampire, despite his best efforts to hide the truth. In 4606, the Age of Lost Omens began with Aradin's death. The World Wound opened in Sarkoris. In 4611, the growing World Wound forced hundreds of Sarkorian refugees to flee their home. Princess Mirate Odranto denied her nation's historic enemy's sanctuary, leading to a slaughter of countless innocents along the country's northern border. Fear of Sarkorians bearing demonic corruption led to the invasion being called the Demon Skin War. In 4662, the charismatic traveler named Rezmir from the River Kingdoms conquered the Archduchy of Melkat. He declared himself a living god, and his priesthood violently encouraged his worship to any non-believers. Following this chaos in the south, worship of the god Razmir became forbidden in Ustalav. By 4669, Razmiri missionaries claimed lands along the undefended southern border of Varno. The vampire Count Tyriak openly ceded hundreds of additional acres to the zealots. Disappearances and the discovery of bloodless corpses soon began in these lands, deterring further attempts by the Razmiri to take more Ustalavi land. In 4670, something interesting happened. Weakness and mismanagement led to the upheaval and bloodless rebellion in western Ustalav. The counties of Lozeri, Tamravenna, and Vieland all abandoned hereditary rule and adopted a cross-country parliamentary democracy, but they remained loyal to the crown, and they became known as the Palatinate. In 4674, the Ustalavic capital was moved from Ardis to Caliphas. Prince Vladislav Odranto died of a persistent but unnamed illness soon after. The following year, Prince Edward III ascended the throne, and Mercilla Calavasso, longtime consort of the fallen prince, gave birth to a child she came to be Valislav's son, naming him Renes Odranto. In 4687, Count Erikny Neska of Barstoi and Count Oloman Vanekdalia of Ardeal had political disagreements over the Furkina region of the Dragasvet Plains. Troops from Barstoi occupied eastern Ardeal, beginning the war without rivals. Appeals from Ardeal for justice and royal censure against Barstoi became mired in political squabbling. By 4689, Varno got pulled into the conflict, siding with Ardeal's nobility, and the fields of Dragasvet turned into an endless series of long, muddy trenches. In 4690, the brilliant scientist of Lepidstadt, Dr. Henry Moritz, was murdered by a monstrous amalgamation of corpses and monster parts given unnatural life. The terror went on a rampage, killing numerous famed citizens and members of the ruling council in Lepidstadt. The monster would come to be known as the Beast of Lepidstadt. In 4693, after years of protracted combat, Count Neska recalled his troops and ceded Furkina back to Ardeal, but not before burning and salting hundreds of square miles of farmland. The fire-scarred, trench-riddled land has been renamed the Furrows. This either brings you up to current time, if you're still playing First Edition, or we move on to the latest development, if you are playing the new edition. In the summer of 4719, the Whispering Tyrant not only returned to the world, but finished the development of a superweapon, using the shards of the shattered shield of Arnescent and naming it the Radiant Fire. As his agents in the Whispering Way conducted numerous crimes to destabilize Lastwall, he used the Radiant Fire to devastate its capital of Vigil, and send hordes of his undead to destroy Lastwall and its defenders. Within a season, the nation of Lastwall was no more. Its last ruler, Watcher Lord Ulthune II, retreated to Absalom, while its most influential priest, Iluna Varvatos, and recently arrived Magambayan philanthropists were organizing daily evacuations by ship from the port of Volumis. Lastwall had ceased to exist, and the region has now been called the Gravelands. Although a group of heroes were able to critically injure Tarbafon, once again he was not destroyed. Instead, he retreated to lick his wounds in the Isle of Terror. The threat from the tyrant was far from over. Meanwhile, in the Gravelands, hordes of undead, commanded by Tarbafon's lieutenant, roamed the countryside of the Gravelands, as do a few goblins, orcs, and those who chose to ally with the Whispering Tyrant. Traveling across this land now is to invite death. but despite overwhelming odds, the surviving Knights of Ozem continue to combat the tide of evil, now calling themselves the Knights of Lastwall. Most of Lastwall's surviving citizens have fled by way of the port city of Volumis, and only the most desperate still stay in their crumbling farms or fortifications. Legendary fortresses like Castle Everstand and Castle Fierney stand empty and grim, as their garrisons, no longer able to count on supplies, were forced to abandon them. Lastwall's countless fleeing refugees have created problems throughout the region, especially in the Ustalavic port city of Caliphas, where the Lastwall refugees have experienced treatment as second-class citizens and occasionally xenophobic abuse. This brings us to today. The ancient emblem of the Kingdom of Ustalav, the nation that was, bears crimson stars surrounding a tower at night, black antlers rising from it. In the golden years after Soividia Ustav founded his nation, the seal symbolized all the realm was and would be. The palace tower rose from the heart of the capital of Ardis, its lit spire window representing the sleepless vigilance of Ustalav's kings. For each of the realm's 16 original noble families, and later 16 counties, a single star shone with the blood spilling by these heroic lords. The horns of the king stem from the antlers crowning the first king's battle helm. The nation's colors, midnight blue and royal purple, were also present on the first king's battle standard. As meaningful as the realm's emblem once was, no symbol could also better represent the wounds suffered by the ancient kingdom. Of the grand noble families, all but 2 lie dead. The palace tower stands in disuse amid a rotting city, and the Ustav line is ended. Yet, Ustalav has somehow managed to endure, despite all its hardships. It is a nation surrounded by the restless dead of the Gravelands in the southwest, the persistent threat of the orcs in the west, a demonic wasteland and various tribes of often vengeful Kelid barbarians in the north, and the despotic theocracy of Resmiran in the southeast. It is only thanks to the grim resolve of its people, honed by many millennia of hardship, that it continues to persevere against the odds. The counties of Ustalav. Vieland. Vieland is Ustalav's northernmost county. It is surrounded by the Shutterwood on one side and the Tusk Mountains on the other side, making it a fairly insulated and secluded region, and one of the later regions to be settled by the Ustalavi people. As a young province, its capital city, the erudite city of Lepidstadt, was only founded in 3898, after the tyrant's return and second defeat, and even then, it only established itself as an important cultural center over 500 years later, when the brothers Traius established the famous university there in 4422. Vieland is also connected directly to Belkzen via the Whisperfall Pass, and the threat of both the Orc from the west and the Kelid from the north have been an unceasing struggle for its people. Vieland was also the second of the Palatinates to turn, those counties that 50 years ago abandoned hereditary rule in favor of rule by an elected council. Of the 3 councils ruling the Palatinates, the Council of Vieland functions most like the realm's architects intended, to the endless frustration of the land's people. Populated by several of the county's wisest and best-intentioned citizens, the council's members include altruistic landowners, deep-thinking patriots, esteemed judges, and learned members of the university. When the doors close upon the council chambers, the matters discussed often have less to do with regional administration and more to do with philosophies and mores on the ideal government. That is to say, with the literati in control, governance strays from the needs of the moment into endless academic debate. Yet, would things have remained any better if the noble Karamark family were still in charge of the country? Accounts record Count Karamark's beneficent abdication of his title, and with all his spare time and resources, now the former count spends his declining years delving deeper into life's mysteries. Knowing that even the supposedly advanced thinkers of Lepidstadt would condemn him for his research, he keeps his experiments and their sometimes horrifying results hidden, in his grand estate at Schloss Karamark on the edge of the Shutterwood. Few know that it is Alpon himself that has created the beast of Lepidstadt, a flesh golem possessed of near-human intellect and a naturally peaceful if inquisitive demeanor, but who has often been blamed for various killings across the country. In any case, despite the council's inefficiencies, there are those among them that have been known to move the needle on pressing issues facing the country's citizens, including architect Eton Valrin, local judge Embreth Daramid, and Dr. Les Richelieu of the Lepidstadt University School of Medicine. These council members have been known to employ personal agents to effect change, utilizing their own fortunes, calling in favors, and patronizing adventurers to create the change they joined the Palatine Council to foster. Let's take a closer look at the county's capital. The community of Lepidstadt rose upon the Lesser Mutre River about 700 years ago, when it was little more than an outpost of farmers and woodsmen who trusted in the murk of the Dippelmere to keep roving bands of orcs and Kelids at bay. The brothers Lyron and Cadamantreus changed that 200 years ago, as their audacious exploration of the spiral cromlech revealed treasures of a mysterious past, their value in gold and mystery outstripping the threat of ancient curses. Soon, an army of scholars and adventure-seekers made the city their garrison, besieging the ruins of the ancient land. Lepidstadt became the permanent home of numerous academics, whose works and families promoted the growth of the local university, and over time elevated it to the vaunted center of scholarship it's known as today. Within the past 40 years, much of Lepidstadt has been renovated, with centuries-old hovels replaced by freshly imported wood and marble. Yet only the city's elite preoccupy themselves with idyllic aspirations, and as one wanders away from the central plazas, old stone homes and repurposed mills show through the modern veneer, their residents living as they have for centuries, rolling their eyes at every new convolution of the city's higher society. Bastions of both the superstitious past and audacious future crowd behind Lepidstadt's walls, their opposing philosophies warring for the city's mind and souls. Places of interest in the city include the spiral cromlech. Although the name refers primarily to the central monument, the spiral cromlech is comprised of an incomplete outer ring of standing stones, 2 alternating circles of moon-white menhirs, and a twisted 16-foot-tall central spire of unidentifiable black rock, etched with images of naked Celid revelers joined by demonic nymphs and curvaceous incubi in their spiraling skyward debauchery. Gravecharge Cathedral. An army of skeletal horses race across the facade and central dome of Lepidstadt's Cathedral of Pharasma, ever rising in a course similar to the goddess's symbol as they ascend into her ethereal domain. Father Eswain Kidaimoikis holds daily services, his pulpit situated behind a mass grave where the ancient bones of the soldiers and steeds of Baldruman Velas, brother-in-arms to Soividia Ustav, are interred. In ages past, these legendary knights did battle against the dragon Kulsithur, fighting off its poison breath long enough to defeat the beast and wrest the land from savagery. The pious claim that the lance of Velas still pins shut the jaws of Kulsithur within the 20-foot-deep ossuary. Lepidstadt University. Ustalav's internationally renowned center of learning, Lepidstadt University endorses the so-called immortal sciences, espousing the ability of medicine, mathematics, and the sciences to unveil wonders rivaling the miracles of magic. Presided over by Dean Asiani Viakari, the campus includes the Laurel Gage Library, Vikir Hall, the Treyas Museum of Antiquities, half of the nearby Fort Cindercairn, and various other lecture halls and dormitories. Aside from its faculty's advances in the understanding of anatomy and medicine, the school is also known for its numerous dueling fraternities, brotherhoods like Gateguard and Malkinclaw, that pride themselves on teaching the artistry and honor of swordsmanship. Before graduation, fraternity members meet unarmored upon Fifth Stone Hall, the city's southern rise, and duel their fellows one at a time until cut upon the face. Such Lepidstadt scars are held as marks of pride and prowess recognized by duelists throughout the world. The Brazen Skull is a favorite pub of members of the university's dueling fraternities. The Brazen Skull holds the rapiers of famed alumni in places of honor upon the taproom walls, arranged in ranks like deadly tally marks. Above the hearth's forest of trophies hangs the blade of owner Kezia Kazansic, along with a bronze stone giant skull, said to shed a single tear every time a member of one of the university's dueling brotherhoods dies. The County of Lozeri. Lozeri is the land of the hunter, where man and beast struggle endlessly in the depths of both the eldritch forest and the mortal heart. The Shudderwood dominates the wildest of Ustalav's counties, where secret valleys, sluggish rivers, and monuments to civilization's failures lay hidden beneath a canopy of merciless green. Many consider Lozeri and the Shudderwood synonymous, seeing little difference between the deadly wilderness and the scattered villages that warily eye its edges. For here the hunter's maxim holds true: by moonlight all men cast the shadows of beasts. Although the philosophies of the Palatinate stem from Vieland scholars, the spark of revolution first flared in Chastel. For generations the people of Chastel had suffered the harsh decrees and high taxes of the Beauturn family. Yet public outcry finally turned to revolt, after Count Beauturn tried to have Gillen Locknave, an outspoken local brewer and clergyman of Caden Calian, executed by having him thrown into a pit of hungry wolves. The merchant's popularity and the viciousness of the execution led to a public uprising, ending with Beauturn falling into the pen of starved wolves and suffering a vicious mauling before he and his sons fled, first from their home, then from the county entirely. The uprising spread throughout the county, and provoked similar action in Canterwall and Vieland. Within a year, most of the land's few nobles had either fled, or made more business-like arrangements with their serfs. Although Lozeri no longer acknowledged regional peerage, wealth and influence, it turned out, could live beyond titles, allowing many formerly noble families to continue to enjoy political control and opulent lifestyles. Of the current 17-member council, only 2 don't trace their birth to former noble families: Shaden Lochnaeve, nephew of revolutionary leader Gillian Lochnaeve, and Rogeef Yarloch, a man who reigns among the most famous hunters of lycanthropes in Lozeri. Speaking of werewolves, the Palatine Council of Lozeri is not the only law in the land. The werewolves of Lozeri and the Greater Shudderwood have their own society, divided into packs, each with their own individual leaders called pack leaders. But they also jointly swear fealty to a single pack lord, who oversees the interests of all the tribes of werewolves and keeps peace between the tribes. Typically, the pack lord is chosen from among the pack leaders, and is named pack lord at a ceremony at a sacred place called the Stairs of the Moon, where the new pack lord consumes the heart of the old pack lord. The current tribes of the Shudderwood are the Broken Ones. These lycanthropes settle in remote or isolated territories, building small provincial communities near the wood's edge. For the most part, they pose as simple farmers or trappers, occasionally traveling to larger communities to sell or trade for goods. They live and hunt in small packs, targeting lone travelers or those who stray from larger groups. Physically smaller than the other tribes, the Broken Ones transform into red wolves. Their pack structure is matriarchal, and their current leader is the druid, Sibrisa Dorsenev. The Demon Wolves. The smallest and most recently formed pack in the Shudderwood, the Demon Wolves are an amalgam of newly afflicted werewolves and exiles from other tribes, all of whom worship the demon lord Giselda, mistress of the Hungry Moon. The tribe's founder, Adamaris Yoniku, was once in fact an afflicted werewolf, who willingly contracted the disease in devotion to his demonic patron. In 4711, after the old pack lord was killed, the Demon Wolves, led by Adamaris, hatched a plan to recover the heart from agents of the Whispering Way who had stolen it. Adamaris was slain in the course of these events. It is not known who succeeded him as tribe leader. The Primals. The smallest of the Shudderwood's tribes, the Primals are also the most homogeneous, as they are all descended from the ancient Kelid tribes who once inhabited these lands before they were driven out by invading Taldans or Verisians. At present, less than 30 remain, settled deep in the woods and traveling in small migratory hunting packs, living much as their ancestors did. Despite their declining numbers, the Primals' ability to transform into large grey dire wolves makes them an influential force among the wolves of the wood. Until his assassination in 4711, the pack leader Kavalka Sane was pack lord over all the wolves of the Shudderwood. It is not known who succeeded Kavalka as pack leader for the Primals. The Prince's Wolves. Verisian werewolves with ties to the Zarni crime families, the Prince's Wolves were so named because they were intentionally created by Prince Andradius Virholt's efforts to rid the lands of the agents of the Whispering Tyrant centuries ago. The Prince's Wolves maintain a tight pack structure, and spend much of their time traveling in small family groups, performing or pickpocketing to support themselves before moving on to do it again somewhere else. Of all the werewolves of the Shudderwood, they have the most relations with humans, because of their Zarni ties. The binding ties of the crime families run deeper than blood or ancestry, it seems. The Prince's Wolves transform into wolves with brown or grey fur, and their current tribe leader is a roguish scoundrel named Rakis Zadro. In 4711, a group of adventurers backed Rakis in a battle for leadership of the Shudderwood werewolves. He has since ascended as the new pack lord of the Shudderwood. The Silverhides. Known for their grey-white fur, the Silverhides are more aggressive than the Broken Ones, yet possess more composure and subtlety than any other tribe. They rarely form standard packs, instead living much of their lives as solitary lone werewolves. More so than all the others, the Silverhides have been successful at blending in with normal humans and living secretly within their communities, with a few bold individuals even settling in some of Ustalav's major cities. In 4711, the Silverhide pack leader, Mathas Mordranacht, collaborated with the cultists of the Whispering Way to have the previous pack lord of the Shudderwood, Kavalka Sane, assassinated, and almost took the position of the pack lord for himself. However, his treachery was revealed by a group of adventurers who were hunting down the leader of the Whispering Way cult, and Mathas was killed in the struggle. It is not known who replaced Mathas as pack leader of the Silverhides tribe. Canterwall. A single vast moor surrounds Lake Lias, stretching to the boggy Esherwood to the east. Here, wariness and ruggedness breed a sturdy lot, a county of quietly determined folk, all too aware that fortunes in blood and back-breaking toil often buy rewards no greater than continued hardship and a swift death. The land of Canterwall, once known as Tam Ravenna, has no love for its people, even though generations of stalwart Ustalavs have poured their lives into the land. only to fall under the wicked blades of Belkzen orcs or other dangers of the land. In the fears of Ustalav, invasion has always come from the west, the orcs of Belkzen, whose realm of cruelty and slaughter sprawls just beyond Canterwall's threshold. Since the nation's founding, the counts of the region have attempted a diverse array of tactics to guard the western lands against the savage hordes. Here one can find the Bleak Wall, the ruins of dozens of fortresses and watchtowers, some built mere yards apart, marking the Belkzen border and testifying to the efficacy of past defenders. The history of Ustalav's defense is a tale of tragedy and madness, with moments of calamity punctuated by epics of disaster, none greater than the deceit and dark promises that unleashed the dragon general Khazavon upon the world. Canterwall isn't just a border province, though. It's a fertile region, watered by the Vistia River and checkered by fields and farms. Sometimes it is even referred to as the breadbasket of Ustalav. While wolves and foxes endlessly torment farmers, the land's greatest annoyances come on black wings. Vast flocks of obstinate ravens and seasonally swarming locusts wreak arbitrary destruction on the land. A balance between lightly wooded plains and bleak moors cover the entire region, all cloaked by dense fog that rolls in from the southern lowlands of the mountains. Canterwall is the third of Ustalav's palatinates, and from the capital at Tam Ravenna, the 9 members of Canterwall's ruling council oversee their county's administration. Well aware that several lands depend on the county's fields for survival, and that the nation's brusque prince might react forcefully to any suspicion of deceit or extortion, the council goes to great length to reinforce the region's reputation as a realm of undemanding, hard-working, and essential laborers. While such proves generally true, the administrators keep a tight guard on the land's ample purse, fearing the jealousy of neighboring nobles. Only towards the cause of defending the county are significant expenditures budgeted, with regional militia being well rewarded and outfitted, especially those who guard the walls of Tam Ravenna. Of the council's members, River Captain Charadane Vanks, landowner Talada Jovanki, and reluctant representative Zonessa Thel agitate most fiercely for their particular agendas, those being national influence, regional security, and simple fairness, respectively. Aside from administering county policies and arbitrating significant disputes, the relatively effectual Palatine Council of Canterwall hears reports from both wings of their divided county militia. The Foreguard, who stand guard over the county's borders under the commander Captain Dalamind Quinn, and the Wall Guard, who protect Tam Ravenna as directed by the paranoid Captain Balton Razorkin. As for the capital itself, the people of Tam Ravenna have long known fear. Tam Ravenna was constructed as a redoubt against the orc hordes, or barbarians should they ever rage from the north. In recent years, however, the town's reassuring walls have turned cold and foreboding, as paranoia has crept among the people and its leaders. The townsfolk have experienced increasingly strict laws on passage through the town, what goods are permitted for sale, what constitutes morally appropriate services, and so on, with fines levied or shops shuttered as the town's laws grow even more restrictive and numerous. And all the while, from vague sources come word of growing criminal syndicates, mysterious saboteurs, and massing orcs in the east, leading the town's residents to hurry home from their jobs and wonder which of their neighbors might be in league with the unseen but encroaching evils. Places of interest in Tam Ravenna include Fort Vieland, the headquarters of the Wall Guard, Tam Ravenna's military police force. Fort Vieland guards the north and west entrances to the town. Fort Palestone, home of the Foreguard, Fort Palestone, named for its walls of white granite, watches over the southern entrance to Tam Ravenna. Travelers find entry through the Palestone by far the least invasive way to enter the town, as the Foreguard aren't as zealous about dangers as the Wall Guard have become, under the increasingly paranoid leadership of Manic Bolton Razorkin. The River House. Beneath the green shingles and bell tower of Tam Ravenna's town hall, the Council of Canterwall meets to direct the fate of the Palatinate citizens. Over the past years, many have succumbed to Captain Razorkin's constant fear-mongering, and fearing orc incursions or the plots of faceless criminal elements have forced the adoption of strict laws prescribing immorality, public privacy, magic, free entry into the city, and any number of other basic rights widely enjoyed elsewhere in the county. Soldiers' Rest. Unusual among Ustalav's temples and cathedrals of Pharasma, Soldiers' Rest harbors shrines to Erastil, Gorham, Iomade, and Torag beneath its spiked onion dome. Father Onman Broshilov served in the Wall Guard decades ago before answering Pharasma's call, and though it's his goddess's will to stoically endure hardship, he has little patience for the overzealousness of the modern militia. The County of Odranto. Varisian-born wanderers were not the first people to claim the lands of Ustalav as their own. For untold generation, tribes of brutal Khelids ruled the region, making forgotten pacts with the spirits of the land, and sowing their bones in the earth. Only by blade and bloodshed were the barbarians driven out, and for centuries their vengeful ancestors raged against the northern gates of the nation that stole their ancestral home. Long have the counts of Odranto watched these gates, raising fearsome castles to protect against the bewildering savagery of the northern hordes, castles built of stone, forsworn to barbarian lords, and bricks made from clay, sown with the dust of Celid kings. Even after Ustalav's rebirth, Odranto continued to face incursions. With the coming of the world wound to Sarkoris, Celid refugees flooded towards Ustalav. Refusing to see her family's homeland overrun by her nation's historic enemies, Princess Marate Ordranti commanded that all Sarkorians crossing the Mutre River face steel as invaders, lest their demonic taint infect Ustalav as well. Thus, countless Sarkorians, fleeing the nightmare of their tainted nation, rushed full into the pikes and quarrels of Odranto's defenders. So went the series of massacres deceptively called the Demonskin War, a conflict that ended only after no Sarkorians remained to flee their hellish homeland. For the first time in history, the borders of Odranto rest quiet, though victory proves bleaker than any of the realm's defenders could have imagined. Today, the people of Odranto live somberly, none quite convinced that even after nearly a century, the threat of invasion is truly gone. The current Count of Odranto, by the rules of hereditary succession, is Conrest Moralt, but as he is descending into madness, much of the region's administration has fallen to his wife, Lirabella. The devoted Countess Lirabella sees her husband struggle every day, and quietly seeks to aid him against his growing madness, but she does not suspect the truth. Conrest Moralt is in fact partially possessed by the spirit of a long-dead necromancer, the former Count Iselin Odranti, who served the Whispering Tyrant during the dark years of his reign. Iselin was decapitated by the tyrant's vampire regent Malleus during a disagreement, but his necromantic powers have kept his spirit alive, within the severed head all these years. Now, rediscovered by Count Conrest, the head of the undying necromancer seeks to claim mental control over his weaker-willed successor. The County of Sinaria. On the shores of Lake Porphyria, the ancient Celids bound their holiest sacrifices and most revered oracles, committing them to the spirits of the marsh. Amid the bog muck and sucking lake mud rest the skulls of ancient Celid witches and seers, their rot mixing with the sickly waters and beasts of the swamps, imbuing the land with the sights of the ancients and an inheritance of timeless pacts and savage magic. Today, belief in the eerie magic of Grademere Swamp and Lake Porphyria permeates the minds of Sinaria's people as an absolute truth. Criminals, Celid refugees, and practitioners of strange magics have long taken refuge amid the swamp's gnarled trees and veils of hanging moss, giving rise to an insular race of proud, swarthy Celid Verisian swamp dwellers, locally known as leechfolk or swampers. Beyond the shunned depths of the Grademere Swamp rolls a land of meandering streams, scattered ponds, and wet grasslands. The people of Sinaria have great respect for the mysteries and creatures of their land. Although city dwellers and even the country folk often scorn swampers and view members of these reclusive clans with suspicion, all know that for the right price the bayou dwellers might jinx a foe, read omens in the algae, or even concoct a medicine to raise the dead. Even still, resentful pride and underhanded literality characterize most dealings with the raft dwellers, and often the hexes brought to stymie a foe come to haunt the buyer 100-fold. To defend against such old magic, witch wards hang upon the lintels of windows and doors throughout the county. Countess Cassandra Livegrace rules the county of Sinaria with a gentle hand. In her youth, she boarded at Carcow Conservatory, in the shadow of the county's famed opera house. While she never became a star of the stage, she is known as a fine soloist, and not an unskilled dancer and violinist. Long before taking over from her elderly father as Countess of Sinaria, when Cassandra was only 14, and in the 6th year of her conservatory's program, Sinaria was abducted and disappeared for 3 months. Rumors abound that she was abducted by the opera's infamous Phantom, but the truth of the matter has never come to light. Her elderly father, Bermanon Livegrace, still resides with her at the Livegrace estate, the Starling House, where the pair live quietly and modestly. Although several years her junior, a former street thief named Venel Endrenale has long called upon the Countess, and the pair share a quiet romance, though the lady quickly dismisses any discussion of nuptials without explanation. In equally uncharacteristic fashion, it is said certain tunes provoke unexpected reactions from the Countess, such as bursts of song in strange tongues, or the recitation of strange facts. Countess Livegrace and her companions disguise their fits well, though many wonder what connection these episodes and her youthful disappearance hold, Cassandra foremost among them. Sinaria's capital of Carcow can be found where the Mutre empties into Lake Porphyria, a delta of dozens of tiny islands ringing with song. Music has transformed a muddy trading post on the clay-tinged lake waters into a city of culture and hope, but also of secrets and dashed dreams. Spacious gardens, avenues lined with linden and walnut, and a lack of fortifications gives Carcow an airiness unique to Ustalavic cities. Locally mined limestone, pale marshwoods, and an architectural love of arches, balconies, towers, and elaborate windows also aid in opening the city, filling the streets and structures with light. Yet the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, and Carcow hides an equal amount of darkness. Beneath the city streets, a system of waterlogged caverns, partially reinforced, expanded, and repurposed as sewer tunnels. For centuries, these black walks have served as avenues for escaped criminals, debauched cultists, and unspeakable things from the nameless depths. Carcow rightly earns its epithet as the village of voices. Echoing across plazas and ringing through alleyways, the city's musicians and hopeful apprentices practice almost endlessly, a local trait that many visitors find turns from charming to obnoxious with startling speed. What many in the south would consider opera dress invades the local fashion, with capes, long gloves, tall hats, and daring gowns accentuating daily wear. Yet even the most pretentious residents find it difficult to forget their city sprawls at the edge of a particularly fetid swamp, as biting flies and fat mosquitoes rise from the nearby lake. Thus, especially in the spring and summer months, Carcow fashions take on an air of mystery, with women donning ornate veils and men wearing masks. Places of interest in Carcow include the Eleusia building, home to Zafiro Lesiege's Eleusia Company, purveyors of fine funeral experiences. Morbid statuary make the tower look less like the headquarters of a wealthy business and more like some gigantic mausoleum. While the structure's heights hold Lesiege's personal penthouse, rumors abound that beneath it are hidden laboratories where alchemists and dark wizards plumb death's darkest secrets. The Carcow Opera. The Carcow Opera stands as the most prestigious school of the arts in northern Avestan. The Carcow Conservatory, the Live Grace Orchestra, the Diamir Opera House, the Museum of Song, and several staff and student boarding houses stand upon its campus near the city's heart. Elegance and tradition characterize most outsiders' vision of the college, but residents know the institute hides a darker side, and trade stories of secret passages, a submerged labyrinth, an exclusive ossuary for the remains of the school's most celebrated alumni, and a hidden balcony where spectators from other worlds adore the greatest performers this world has to offer. The Starling House. Ancestral home of the Live Graces, Sinaria's line of ruling counts, the Grand Manor's pale stone walls grant it a spectral quality as it hides amid the cottonwoods and hanging moss. The Countess treats her childhood home as a personal sanctuary, and often retreats to the house's lofty windows to overlook her city, and sometimes exercise her melodic voice. The County of Barstoi. Barstoi has always been the backwater of Ustalav. Where both Canterwall and Odranto stand against the threats from abroad, they do so in defense of a rich country. Barstoi, on the other hand, has traditionally been held as a matter of national pride, cementing the country's hold on all the lands from the Tusk Mountains to the West Selin River. Up until recent decades, the rocky earth and sickly fields hid myriad dangers, from prowling monsters to Kelid zealots claiming scattered caves or stones as holy ground. With the death of Count Bierce in 4665, Barstoi's ruling line ended. Prince Vladislav Odranto sought to raise several favored nobles to rulers of the land, but all declined, not caring to inherit the destitute, perhaps cursed land. Unexpectedly, after the county had spent months without an administrator, a tin mogul named Erechny Neska, a member of a lesser Versex noble family, entreated the prince for a provisional term as its administrator. He promised that, given a term of 3 years, he would wrest the crown a profit from the harsh land. With no other candidates daring such claims, Prince Vladislav accepted. Neska swiftly implemented massive social projects in the region, financing them with his own wealth and attracting droves of workers. Mountains of scattered rocks were moved, new Pharasman monasteries were constructed, barbarians, goblinoids, and drakes were slain, and fit mercenaries won titles as knights of the land. Exploration into the pits and caves riddling the country also revealed a wealth of salt in its northern hills. Before the end of Neska's 3-year term, Barstoi's reputation had changed from that of a worthless, dangerous heath to a safe countryside rich with potential. Princess Marate herself bestowed the title of Count on Erechny Neska 4 months before the end of his challenge. True power brought a swift change to Neska's rule. Determined to see Barstoi rise beyond other counties, the Count continued vast building projects, constructing new border forts, roads, towns, and county-owned farms and salt mines. He also instituted a host of strict new laws, reaching beyond criminal sanctions to enforce authoritarian moral sanctions. He absolutely forbid the use of arcane magic, and he insisted on the countrywide worship of Pharasma. Punishment for deviancy proved harsh from the outset, but as the Count aged, his mandates grew even more draconian, finally resulting in a single punishment for all crimes: death. In 4687, Nesca's intolerance of incompetence and corruption ignited a 6-year-long civil war between his county and neighbouring Ardeal. While his crusade ultimately proved fruitless, it reduced the once rich region of Furkina into the trench-riddled wasteland now known as the Furrows. Today, Barstoi is technically one of the fittest counties in Ustalav, a police state of uniformed townships and even fields where oppressive knights clad in Nesca's grey heraldic condor and dark-robed Phrasman witch hunters are endlessly scrutinizing a fearful populace. While toil, obedience, and mercilessness cloaked in patriotism see individuals rewarded with land and gold, whatever wealth Barstoi's people find in their pockets, it is countered by the hopelessness they feel in their souls. The County of Ardeal. Ardeal takes its name from Ardelia, first wife of Ustalav's unifier, Soividia Ustav. For 9 centuries, Ustalavic kings ruled from the city of Ardis, driving back wild Kelids, Belks, and Orcs, and other threats as they expanded and tamed their rugged country. Here, Arduras, last king of Ustalav, faced the conquering legions of the Whispering Tyrant and fell, breaking the line of Ustalavic kings. After the Shining Crusade, Ardeal once more became the home of Ustalav's royalty, while a newly risen nobility fractured the nation's fertile heartland into multitude fiefdoms. For generations the nobles squabbled over the realm's richest lands. Some coaxed great wealth from nature's bounty, while others reduced the country's greatest resources to fields of dust. It is in this context that Prince Vladislav Odranto made a decree to move the nation's capital to Caliphas, and the county of Ardeal suffered greatly from this sudden withdrawal. Once bustling noble estates now stand empty, their lands left fallow or in the hands of squatters, as the rightful owners followed the royal court to Caliphas. The sprawling city of Ardis stands as a withered shadow of its former grandeur, its population decreased by thousands, its industries struggling to survive, and dark things creeping in to replace the human deserters. A sentiment of righteous bitterness against the country's government and nobility flourishes among Ardeal's people. Abandoned serfs across the countryside find themselves forced into subsistence farming, immigrating to cities, or banding together in pitiful hamlets defending against neighbors turned to banditry. In larger communities, especially in the capital of Ardis, the opinion grows even fiercer, as shops and industries wither and die daily, casting whole families into poverty. City dwellers with the means to continue on daily face the sneers and begging hands of the growing number of destitute. In dark alleys and amid whole abandoned blocks prowl growing numbers of thieves, deluded revolutionaries, and the insane, desperately struggling to survive these bleak days and see a dawn with little hope of being any brighter. The current Countess of Ardeal, Countess Solismina Kroskamile, once entranced the people of Ustalav with her talent and beauty, sweeping the country as a leading lady of national theatre. Her charms won her armies of suitors, but in 46-48 she settled for none less than Count Oleman Venekdalia, Lord of Ardeal. Marriage and the births of her children did little to impact her lifestyle, with her 4 daughters being raised largely by nannies and valets. After the difficult birth of her 4th child and a lengthy convalescence, the Countess made her return to society with a self-penned, self-themed performance titled Worth the Wait. The play, however, proved an utter embarrassment, and it ended abruptly after it had run for only 2 of its scheduled 40 nights, when she raged off-stage mid-performance to the jeers of the audience. Thereafter, she disappeared from public eye, surrounding herself with sycophants and former associates. Clinging to memories of her heyday, the aging Countess views herself as Ustalav's most charming socialite, the pinnacle of what an Ardelian lady should be. Rarely leaving her Ardis estate of Lavender Hall, she spends most of her days abed, refusing to acknowledge the weight of her age and instead constantly complaining of being overtaxed or susceptible to the vapors. Despite all the hard times the county has faced, native Ardelians still refer to Ardis as the true capital of Ustalav, regardless of whether they remember the city's slow desertion. With the stubborn arrogance of those still bristling from the sting of decades-old defeat, the people of Ardis cling to their pride, their traditions, and their vaunted past, as nearly all else has passed them by. Gargoyles clamber upon the needle-sharp towers and lean onion domes of Ardis's aged architecture. Sweeping arches, somber spires, and rib-like buttresses once served to give the city centre an air of hallowed circumstance, as if every dark stone edifice were the setting of some great import. Yet, as if no longer supported by the magnitude of the deeds that once transpired within their halls, many formerly great buildings show the weight of sombre years, appearing ever more like neglected crypts and sagging tombstones. Places of interest in Ardis include the Blindstone. After the defeat of the Kelid shaman king Vokes and the exile of the last Kelid from his land, King Ustav had the godstone of the fallen Stormheart clan dragged to his capital in chains as a symbol of his victory. Centuries later, the ancient menhir called the Blindstone still stands at the center of Crusader Square. Accounts of the country's founding describe the stone as central to the shamanistic rites of the Stormheart, bearing images of barbarian dancers cavorting to its 21-foot summit, where a being made of storms and eyes welcomes its children. None in untold generations have seen these carvings, however, as the rusted links of Ustav's massive and mighty chains bind the monument even after an age. The Ever-Crowned Cemetery, once a lavish garden full of majestic monuments honoring the heroes and royalty of Ustalav's past. The resting place of the nation's former kings now stands unguarded, its once glimmering stones and quiet statues now besieged by creeping vines, brazen gangs, and the righteously offended dead. The Palace Tower. Thrusting from among the vaulted roofs and thorny spires of Stag Crown, the abandoned former home of the country's royal court, the Palace Tower stands as a symbol of Ustalav's dauntless past and dismal present. Soyvidia Ustav constructed the tower so he might personally keep guard over his lands, but in the ages since, the ominous Black Spear has been a home to madness, a prisoner to traitors, and the death of more than one ruler. Here, King Arduras, the last king of Ustalav, later reanimated as the shrieking sovereign, hung his crackling carcass over Ardis, shrieking a score of doom and profanities as the legions of the Archlich massacred the city. Today it lies in abandonment, and the citizens of Ardis whisper that Ustalav's royal spirits take umbrage at the capital's desertion, and nightly hold spectral summits and regal revels once more, from the echoing throne room to the moaning heights of the palace tower. The county of Virlych. The chain-bound steeples of Gallowspire, the stake in the heart of Ustalav, looms over an accursed wasteland of shattered mountains and dark magic, a monument to an age of genocide and blasphemy. Spreading around it, tainted by proximity to the Whispering Tyrant's throne, sprawls the scar of the Archlich's first maniacal vision, a realm of ruin racked by uncontrolled spellstorms and prowled by the abandoned miscarriages of unholy experiments. For untold centuries, Virlych bore more than just the wounds of history, for within its crumbling womb slept the architect of that dread epic, the deathless obscenity Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant. Of course, as we now know, 3 years ago the tyrant arose once more, but thankfully turned its gaze southwards towards the nation of Lastwall, that had been raised as a bastion against his inevitable return, and he reduced that nation and its great cities to rubble. Thankfully for the Ustalavi people and their nation, the tyrant abandoned Gallowspire and retreated to his old fortress on the Isle of Terror, but darkness like his takes more than a few years to dissipate. Today little lives in Virlych, though the realm is hardly uninhabited. While the eastern Hungry Mountains are known for their driving rain and violent lightning storms, these take on a terrible aspect to the west, where twisted magical ethers imbue the harsh weather with seeming malicious intent. Tales of living dust storms and lightning phantoms pass among those forced to travel near these lands, such apparitions sometimes being visible from miles away. Natural creatures do exist in Virlych, though the sparse vegetation and incessant storms make even the meanest beasts ill-tempered and fierce. Small packs of mangy wolves, spiny beetles, feral rodents, and all manner of carrion birds scour the land's corpse in search of its sparse vegetation, and trespassers slain by things with no need for food. Virlych does not have a count, nor is it truly considered among the counties of Ustalav, but rather as a blight on the land, to be guarded against and watched over. The county of Amaans. Clenched in the teeth of the Hungry Mountains, Amaans careens from the heights of Ulcazar to the hill country of the Gorka Passage. A land of seclusion, storms, dense mist, and deadly beauty, Amaans refuses to yield easily to either plough or blade. Something of the old mountain's cold, unrelenting stone pervades every field, tree, and stream, relegating the land's few settlers to faltering edges and quiet hollows of the hardwood wilderness. The hardy residents of tiny hamlets and homesteads eke lives from the valleys and forests only at the leave of the land's grim spirits, and do all they can to avoid the heights' supposedly unnatural storms or the ghostly servants of the Lich's ancestral domain to the west. Although mountains cover most of Amaans, its infamous 100-haunted vales hide diverse ecologies. Dense forests prove most common, yet some valleys hold foggy bogs, expanses of jagged scree, or deep mountain lakes. The people of Amaans distinguish themselves as either Cavapestans or Valefolk. the residents of Cavapesta devotedly worshipped Pharasma, living austere lives, wary of passions and excess joy, fearing that surfeit pleasure might weigh against them when the goddess of death judges their lives. The stern people mistrust worshippers of other faiths, artists, and light-hearted visitors, fearing moral pollution and the temptations of the quick. Vale folk, too, are a suspicious lot. Dozens of tiny hamlets dot the slopes of the highlands of Amaans, where quiet, courteous folk live in islands of relative tranquility amid the mountains. These sleepy communities value their privacy and seek not to offend the myriad nature spirits, fairies, and hags of their rampant folklore. In such lands, it's not uncommon for travelers, especially non-humans, to be mistaken for mischievous fae in disguise. To such ends, Vale folk often carry neck pouches of iron dust, old horseshoes, or bent nails to cast at strangers to prove their nature, as local superstitions say that iron burns treacherous spirits and forces them back into their true shapes. Amaan's count is named Lucinian Galdana, a rugged gentleman with sun-baked features, a mane of dark hair, and a physique better suited to soldier than ruler. Count Galdana often appears uncomfortable amid the trappings of his station, and quickly shrugs off the bonds of tradition or rank. Though possessed of a keen mind and a strong will, his tastes trend towards simplicity, with little patience for discourtesy, elitism, or posturing. Were one to ask Cavapesta's devout Pharasmans their view of the Count, most would tell tales of lurking incubus, eager to tempt the weak of faith to his den of debauchery. The county's nobility and less prudish residents, however, take an outlook closer to the truth, viewing him as a lifelong bachelor, with respectable intentions but few political agendas, beyond those that further his interest in good drink, rousing hunts, and fair ladies. Another important figure in the county of Amaans is Bishop Ulametria of the Pharasman penitents, who would tower over most of her congregation if she could stand straight, yet a lifelong regimen of self-mortification has crippled her to a perpetually kneeling posture. Despite her religious zeal, Bishop Ulametria possesses a keen mind, performs daily sermons, and believes in healing the sick and easing excess burdens. Yet she also sees virtue in pain, and several clerics of Cryptgate bear scars and disfigurations the Holy Mother refuses to let them heal. Ulcazar. The county of Amaans claims all but the chilling heights of the Hungry Mountains. There, amid the spire's jagged crowns, treacherous goat paths, and lashing winds, poises the citadel county of Ulcazar, an impregnable natural fortress where brutish elements viciously strive to assure that the realm's secrets remain unknown. Ulcazar was fashioned as a prison once, a county in name only, with little arable land and few resources worth exploiting, a doom of seclusion and poverty for those condemned to its rule. The prisoner for which it was designed was none other than Niliviso Ulca, a second cousin and field commander of Soividia Ustav, infamous for betraying the first king of Ustalav to the armies of the Kelid chief Thornbro. It said Ulca starved in his estate upon the slopes of Mount Laufis, and then it was quiet for an age. Centuries after the conclusion of the Whispering Tyrant's rule, however, a new corruption came to Ulcazar. What began as a simple refuge for monastic scholars in the service of the Lady of Graves transformed, through tragedy and revenge, into the throne of a deadly silence. In the monastery of Veils grew a cult of secrets, called the Anaphexia, which have grown to be the new masters of Ulcazar. Although no communities in Ulcazar even reach sizes large enough to be considered villages, a half-dozen or so scattered hamlets and communes find shelter enough to eke out poor existences amid the unforgiving peaks. Those who choose to live in the county number among either its handful of pathetic nobles and their attendants, its religious anchorites seeking enlightenment amid the austere stones, or joyless peasants living in poverty, secrecy, or exile. Many in Ulcazar go mad by degrees, smothered by the weight of the unsympathetic land or their own pasts. The master of the monastery of Veils, and the acting count of Ulcazar, is Bishop Yesmardin Senir. The third son of a third son, Yesmardin Senir was not destined for power. Rather, in following with the Ustalavic custom, his fate was to serve, the third-born son of any noble family being tradition-bound to take oaths of devotion to Pharasma. Departing the Senir family holdings in Ardis, the estate of Lowmound, the spoiled young Yesmardin begrudgingly travelled into the cold harshness of Ulcazar, plotting naive schemes of eluding fat monks and returning home within a week. Bishop Rithwain, the then master of the monastery, wasted no time in revealing the monastery's secret patron, dragging the boy into the cloister's depthless library catacombs and locking him within the sanctuary of Nergorber. Yesmardin's screams would be his first offering to the Reaper of Reputation. For nearly a month, Bishop Rithwain tortured and starved the boy, visiting every midnight to ask if the Reaper had spoken to him. Despite the boy's pleas, curses, and promises, the Lord of the Anaphexia had no mercy. Finally, on the night of the new moon, a voice spoke from the shadows, and motes of ruby light dripped like blood from the blades of Norgorber's effigy. Yasmardin would be the hand to shelter and guide the gods' blades, and work to steal and safeguard the secrets of an age of fools and preparations for a future fit for their exploitation. In return, he would be a lord like none in his family ever were, with wealth, power, and cunning beyond the petty concerns of mortal nobility. Though terrified, the youth exulted in the promise of freedom and life, and swore allegiance to the dark god. That night, when Bishop Rithwain came to the boy, Yasmardin did not cry, but drew a blade across his body in offering. In the years that followed, Yasmardin grew in power, just as the dark god promised. As bishop of the monastery of the Vale, his blade struck out against his own family, slaying his brothers so that the mantle of lordship came to rest with him. Maintaining his guise as a stern bishop of Pharasma, Bishop Sinir holds both political and sectarian influence, exploiting members of the court through political guile, manipulations of faith, and the findings of his brotherhood of assassins and spies. The County of Versex. Versex's hills meander from mountain to coast, their rocky slopes gradually shrouded by a mixture of stunted grasses and dense mosses, strewn with eerie spiraling fairy rings. The earth proves ill-suited to farming, with most crops growing stunted or crooked. The beasts of Versex have long suffered from similar unwholesomeness, with wild animals and livestock alike falling victim to phage, a starving affliction distinguished by unnatural paleness, starved appearance, erratic violence, and horrifying deformed progeny. The county breeds a stiff private people, shackled by traditions of reservation and aloof civility. The beliefs that proper folk don't meddle in the affairs of their neighbours, and that the upright don't make their lives the worry of others, socially isolate townsfolk and city dwellers alike. Most of the county's inhabitants don't bother with their neighbours, and if they do, it's typically only to malign their improprieties. The hereditary lordship of the county of Versex sits with Count Hazerton Lowles IV. If ever noble blood ran in the veins of the Lowles family, its richness spoiled long before the birth of Hazerton IV. The fourth consecutive Count Hazerton Lowles to rule Versex, the middle-aged count was long known for a near-crippling social awkwardness. Having ruled Versex for 24 years, he finds governance tedious, leaving most of his responsibilities in the hands of grasping mayors and magistrates. From his family's Thrushmoor estate of Iris Hill, Hazerton used to apply himself to a rigorous but erratic curriculum of history, theology, antiquarianism, philology, poetry, and occultism. Refusing to tolerate tutors, considering such instruction beneath his grand intellect, he spent hours daily corresponding with peers and rivals at the University of Lepidstadt, Porvos's Academy, the Syncomacti School of Sciences, and Absalom's Forae Logos. Considering himself an expert on many matters above the minds of lesser scholars, Hazerton penned numerous rambling treatises, extrapolating upon dubious and under-researched theses. His Minds of the Atlanti, A History of the History of Versex, and The Stars Are Not Among Us, the latter ending his tempestuous relationship with the Syncomacti school, can be found at many centres of scholarship in Ustalav, but more due to the Count's generous patronage than scholarly merit. Over the last few years, the typically withdrawn Count completely sequestered himself within his library, testing the ability of Thrushmoor's booksellers by demanding load after load of varied and specific tomes. Midway through his retreat, he dismissed his entire house staff, replacing them with a retinue of strange and silent foreign assistants. Along with his dramatic changes in appearance and scholarly interests, Count Lowell's personality has also changed. Suspicion, muttering preoccupation, and the occasional furious outburst now overshadow his social awkwardness. Versex County's austere capital of Thrushmoor marks the northernmost point of the vast lake in Carthen, and though its sheltered docks and well-used fishing dories suggest nothing more than a community of hard-working seafarers, the town's elders make the spiral of Pharasma over their hearts as they swear weird currents carry all that's strange and unnatural into the depths of Avalon Bay. While the homes and structures upon the lake show the damage of lashing waves and frequent flooding, those in the higher ground, the territory of the town's quality folk, posture as the home of wealthy landowners, with pristine picket fences, sharp gables, and columned facades. While few in Thrushmoor are truly wealthy, the townsfolk go to great lengths to keep up appearances. Standing, respectability, and appearance concern most of the townsfolk, who do all they can to avoid embarrassment in the critical eyes of their neighbours. Yet in the shadows of attics and basements languish the sins and repressions of Thrushmoor, where deranged children, possessed artists, and the adherents of unnameable gods form an uncounted population of freaks and lunatics, just beneath the town's mask of propriety. Places of interest include Iris Hill. Home to the Lowells family since the rule of Pragmus Lowells over 2 centuries ago, Iris Hill meanders over the summit of the rise with the same name, the central estate attended by stables, servants' quarters, and guest cottages. Until recent times, it was Thrushmoor's most elegant home, but over the past year it has fallen into neglect.
The Count's longtime servants dismissed, ivy and weeds besiege the structure, loose shutters creak in even the slightest breeze, and several broken windows admit the wind and weather. Yet Iris Hill has not been abandoned, and within Count Lowles and his shadowy assistants occupy themselves tirelessly amid the manor's ever-expanding library, interrupted only by the occasional midnight delivery by an unmarked black coach. The Sleepless Detective Agency. Run by its founder, the mysterious Casadia Rents, this well-connected, highly organized, and unscrupulous professional agency of guards and detectives hires out to anyone with a coin to pay for its services. While the organization touts its successes at finding lost persons, exposing corruptions, and hunting down members of the Whispering Way, it downplays many members' inclination towards invasiveness, sabotage, and strong-armed harassment. The Star Steely. The scholars of the Sincomacti school have long attested that no true Kelid tribes lived in the Versex region. Yet, Thrushmore's Star Steely seems to refute the fact. 3 12-foot-tall semicircular monoliths stand in an equidistant triangle atop Town's Hill, each etched with unidentified non-Kelid runes and a misshapen star. The County of Varno. Time means little in Varno. Generations are born, life passes, and death eventually touches servants and princes alike. Such has been the philosophy of Varno's people since the Kelids were driven from the land, and such remains their mantra today. When legions of the dead rose in envious war against the living, most of Varno's people held their lives at greater value than their land, departing Ustalav to settle among the people of the neighboring Archduchy of Melkat, rejoining their wandering kinsmen in distant Varissia, or seeking new vistas exploring Taldor's vast empire. After the dead turned to dust, some wandering Varissians resettled in Varno, bringing with them their ancient ways and the reminder that a land holds no memory. Only its people can do that. Mild slopes roll across Varno in a gentle surf of emerald orchards and golden fields. To the west, the forest of Vales knots in a tangle of dense cypress, laurel, and alder, its boughs rising high like the buttresses of some grand cathedral, a sanctuary that burns every autumn in a riot of crimson leaves. Most of the county's population work modest farms, orchards, and vineyards, or on the estates of the region's few noble families, but several still keep to the ancient Varissian wandering lifestyle. Conte Aristomar Tyriak is the lord of Varno, and his story is a tragic one. Returning to Corvuscure from a holiday, Aristomar's coach was ambushed by brigands, an explosion sending the conveyance reeling into a ravine. Escaping the wreckage, the wounded nobleman proved his skill with a rapier, slaying several highwaymen despite a spear of jagged wood piercing his breast. His soon-to-be bride, Iltania, however, was not so lucky. Desperation and love granted the young count the resilience to escape with the unconscious form of his soon-to-be bride. But the mysterious attackers were not so easily deterred. Within sight of Lake Corsinoria, the brigands overrode the count, and knocked him from his horse, and beat him to the threshold of death. With the count's family still in the country, servants retrieved their lord's body. It fell to Count Tyriak's aged housemother Radia to see to Ristomar's care, but even her enigmatic skills were not enough, and Ristomar's life waned. Possessed by her devotion to the family, the wrinkled housemother gave strange orders, and in the direness of the moment, the servants obeyed. By midnight, the still form of the vampire Beruso, captured and staked by a noble huntsman years earlier, lay in Corsinoria's great hall, bound by chains of garlic and verbena. Removing the stake piercing the creature's breast and brandishing Desna's symbol, Radia bid the vampire breathe life back into the count, even if it must be the breath of his accursed kind. When Ristomar arose, it was with a hunger he had never known. Radia watched over him, explaining how she had saved him. Although terrified and furious, Ristomar knew that so long as Iltania was safe, his death would not be in vain. When the baffled housemother reported that his fiancé's body had never been found, his mind snapped, and the blood-starved madness took hold. Awakening the next night among the gore-soaked ruins of the family chapel, Ristomar found the castle empty, the servants massacred or fled. Only Radia remained, her body shattered, but her faithful ghost lingering on. As Ristomar knelt upon the palace's highest turret, awaiting the dawn's purifying destruction, the spectral crone explained that should he die as he was, his soul would be condemned to the charnel pits of hell. Whether Iltania was dead or alive, he would never see his beloved again. So the count despaired, and cursing the witch, fled the manor. Since his death, Ristomar Tyriak has journeyed far. Reappearing to his people in 4536 as a cousin of the heartbroken rulers, he took control of Varno, employing agents to hold his proxy at court. Traveling often in his search for a cure for vampirism, Tyriak is known in many lands, sometimes by his own name, sometimes under aliases, and often adopting colorful corruptions of his title, such as Conte. Charming and eternally youthful, he retains a shadow of the humor he possessed in life, though an age as a predator has granted him the cunning and manipulative forethought of an undead lord.
Yet while his research has made him scholar of strange arts, his sought-after cure continues to elude him. The County of Greater Caliphas. In Ustalavic history, the County of Greater Caliphas once held reputation as the demesne of witches and their soulless servitors. Legends say that with the defeat of the country's last king, the mysterious sisters of the Albier Woods parleyed with the whispering tyrant to take control of the land they considered theirs, but the uncaring lich spurned them and scattered their numbers. After the tyrant's fall, Caliphas numbered among the first counties reborn, its rulers, the Calavaso family, being one of only 2 noble lineages to survive the lich's rule. Rivalry between the coastal county and the capital of Ardis began almost immediately, exacerbated by contention between the Calavasos and the newly crowned Odranto line, a bitterness that persists into the modern age. Caliphas claims a dramatic landscape, sloping down from the rocky peaks of the Hungry Mountains through woodlands and fertile river country to the rocky coast of Lake Carthan and Avalon Bay. Although the people of Caliphas pride themselves on their enlightenment, their superstitions merely take a more urbane quality. Folk medicines and rural portents replaced by racial prejudices and peddled omens. Such faux worldliness leads many city dwellers to dismiss the supernatural as hokum, unsuited to modern reason. Personal independence and a dismissive attitude towards the crown typify local outlook, according the region its reputation as a haven for dissension and a leader among counties opposed to the monarchy, even as it harbors the throne. The hereditary Count of Caliphas is the Countess Carmilla Calavaso. A decadent schemer with an insatiable lust for power, Countess Carmilla Calavaso is also an unmatched beauty. At more than 70 years of age, she looks less than half that age, and is known as the Ruby of Caliphas. She is a venomous critic of Grand Prince Edward Odranto III, taking every opportunity to point out his numerous flaws, trying to undermine his authority, and scheming to turn his people against him. Her criticism has become steadily more outspoken, as her young charge, Rhaenys Odranto, has grown to manhood. Rhaenys is the son of Milera Calavaso, and supposedly is the bastard son of the previous prince Vladislav Odranto. Few doubt that Carmilla Calavaso plans to put her charge and nephew Rhaenys on the throne of Ustalav. There are darker rumors that she may plan to sit next to him, as she supposedly is involved in an incestuous relationship with him, and eyes the title of Grand Princess covetously. Caliphas is also the seat of power of the monarch of all of Ustalav, the Grand Prince Edward Odranto III. As the second son of Prince Emerate Odranto and Duke Addington Holtzfer, Edward Odranto never expected to rule. By the time Edward reached his majority, it was obvious he had little taste for the life of a pampered princeling, possessing a hardy constitution and a headstrong disposition, and a predilection for the outdoors, hunting, and the company of soldiers. After completing his schooling, Edward traveled the country's wilder reaches, hunting and touring the forts of the northern and western borders, and discovering an appreciation for military life. Although the death of his brother and his own ascendance to the throne had never been his desire, Edward accepted it as Pharasma's will, taking the throne at age 29. Rough, unprepared, and overly trusting in his divine right to lead, the early years of Edward's reign were characterized by brashness and political naivete, at a time in which eastern Ardeal was scoured by the war without rivals. In the more than 40 years since, Edward continues to put great faith in Pharasma's guidance, and an adopted tradition of military stoicism, but has also grown more skilled at manipulating political rivals. He still despises endless debates, leading to occasional flares of ire and abrupt ends to courtly proceedings. Although he tries, poorly, not to let his private opinions show, the prince loathes Count Nesca and Countess Calavaso for their arrogance and endless scheming, and finds that Palatinate endless changing spokespersons simpering cowards, but enjoys a kindred spirit and dependable political ally in Amaans Count Galdana. Sailing from Lake Carthan past the reaping rocks, 1,000 fog lamps reluctantly emerge from the swirling haze, and the weirdly echoing din of countless faceless souls heralds one's arrival in Caliphas, mist-shrouded capital of Ustalav. Constructed behind the treacherous shield of a natural breakwater, the capital city of Caliphas flourishes as the nation's wealthiest, most accessible, and most cosmopolitan city. These factors, along with other more mysterious persuasions, argued for the royal court's relocation to within the city walls 40 years ago. Although a new capital, Caliphas is still an old city, and the grim statuary, soaring buttresses, sharp gables, and endless intimidating embellishments common to the nation's oldest cities adorn its ominous structures. New industries also belch black clouds into the sky, mixing with a frequent fog to cloak some parts of the city in a wretched coat of ash. Yet numerous gardens, private menageries, and fenced parks dot the crowded cityscape, making Caliphas feel more alive than many Ustalavic cities. The past decades have brought thousands of immigrants to the capital, as well as many refugees from neighboring Lastwall. While the noble-born find and create luxurious housing with ease, their attendants have considerably more trouble. Such has led to not just overcrowding, increased squalor and street violence in parts of the city, but to stranger crimes against which the overwhelmed constabulary has little defense, such as kidnapping, hidden slavery, underground fighting bouts, mysterious murders, and rumors of terrors lurking amid the city's labyrinthian sewers. Places of interest include Castle Strythe. The imposing spire-crowned citadel rises from the city's center like a bladed fiendish heart trapped amid a web of mounting buttresses. It is home to the audience hall and black-antlered royal throne of Prince Odranto, the echoing Hall of Peers, with its 16 traditional stations, the portrait hall known as the Gallery of Ancestors, the royal archives, a private wing for visiting dignitaries, and a maze of shadowed alcoves, conference chambers, and salons. The Haven Guard Lunatic Asylum. A most unusual hospital spreads its bat-like wings across the crumbling cliffs overlooking Caliphas. Under the direction of its founder, the dedicated but locally slandered Dr. Borigman Trice, the asylum's physicians attempt to protect, understand, and heal without the aid of expensive magical interventions, though many admit incomplete understanding of the maladies they treat or missteps in their more experimental therapies. Lethean Manor. Private gardens of sweetly scented poisons and watchful statuary hide the ancestral town home of Caliphas's counts. Built upon Laurel Height Hill, the luxurious estate of Carmilla Calavasso serves the most frequently used of the Countess's residences, as well as the abode of her all-male staff and the site of her frequent private fetes. Those who enter the Countess's personal invitation recall decadent accommodations and hedonistic entertainment, amid impressions of scandalous innuendos and constant observation. Maiden's Choir, a gigantic dome of amethyst-veined black marble, stares unblinking heavenward from Caliphas's Temple of Pharasma, like some vast empty socket. At the chapel's heart stands a silver mausoleum-like reliquary, said to bear such holy treasures as the Sarkoran song skulls, the scroll bones of Father Gazenji, and the armored gown of Tears. The Quarterfoe Archives. Both museum and academy to Caliphas's young nobles, the curators of the Quarterfoe Archives seek not to explore the world, but to bring its wonders to Ustalav. Whether gathered by traveling professors or purchased from unscrupulous organizations, the artifacts of the museum's collection range from Ulfin longboats and mysterious Northland fossils to living elven root sculptures and strange Mwangi fetishes. Currently, of greatest local interest are the canopic ethers of Menades XIV, discovered by Osiriontologist Auberon Shallist, and the temporary display of the Malo family's ancient treasure, the Invidian Eye.
And what to say after such a long video. I'm glad you're still with me. Next week we're going back to gods and goddesses. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I'll see you next week.